has joined the meeting.
Byron Bryant
has joined the meeting.
Hello, and welcome to the February 10th, 2022 Raleigh Transit Authority board meeting. In 2020, Governor Cooper and the North Carolina General Assembly authorized municipalities to hold remote virtual meetings in response to the COVID-19 pandemic to address public safety and the need for social distancing. In accordance with state law, the Raleigh Transit Authority will hold its meetings remotely and open to the public viewing. These meetings will continue to be remote and virtual until further notice. I will now do the roster for the Raleigh Transit Authority. Please signify by saying aye. Make sure I have the correct one. All right, Nathan Spencer.
Aye.
Karen Ridge. Sarah Prado. Jennifer Truman.
Here.
Brian Burnett. Joshua Gill.
Here.
LaPonda Edmondson.
Aye.
And LaTanya Williams.
Here.
Is our city council liaison, Councilman Corey Branch here? All right. So we will go ahead and jump into the agenda.
Madam Chair.
Oh, Linda Davis. I'm sorry, I think I had an outdated, I think the one I pulled up didn't have you on it.
Okay, I'm here.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you for clarifying that. Thanks for that correction. All right. So would anybody like to make a motion to approve the January minutes?
It's Linda Davis. I move we approve the January minutes.
Thank you, Linda.
This is Jen Truman. I'll second.
All right, perfect. So it's been moved and properly seconded. I will do the roll. Please state aye if you agree in approving the minutes, and nay if you do not. We will start with Ms. Linda Davis.
Aye.
Nathan Spencer.
Aye.
Jennifer Truman.
Aye.
Joshua Gill. Was Joshua here?
Aye.
LaPonda Edmondson.
Aye.
LaTanya Williams.
Aye.
And I approve it as well. Tolulope Omokaye. So the move has been passed to accept the January minutes. Are there any additions or revisions to our agenda?
Madam Chair, I do have one small addition.
All right.
If I could, actually, it's not a small addition. It's we're very proud addition, but it's kind of a bittersweet, put it that way. But we have Miss Aldonia Brown with us today. She obviously is a 25-year recent retiree at Go Raleigh. She is with Mr. Byron Bryant currently. And Andrea, I'm going to see if Byron and Ms. Brown would like to have a few words. Certainly, Ms. Brown was recognized through some signage down at the station and out at Pool Road, and just had a great time. Obviously, I think there was some media recognition as well, and she's done such a great job for us over the years. And we just wanted to take this opportunity, certainly from a staff perspective, and I'm sure the board will say the same, but just thank you so much. And Byron, are you guys there? He may be having audio problems. Maybe you can see him in the conference room there.
I do see them.
Yeah. He's on mute, though. I don't think he knows.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Oh, that's actually working now. Okay. So I actually called in as well because we were having technical difficulties.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Can you hear us? Okay, cool. Do you all have any? We would love to hear from you. Just celebrating her years of service. Are you talking? We can't hear you.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So as Mr. Eatman mentioned, we did have some signage that we put up at Go Raleigh Station acknowledging Miss Brown, as well as out here at Pool Road. In addition to that, we did a ceremonial handoff from Miss Brown to a trainee out here on the lot after she completed her last trip.
Yes.
And in addition, once we have some easing of the protocols, we're also going to host a luncheon for Miss Brown here at the facility, which she likes. So at this time, we do have just a couple more things we want to give Miss Brown, and that is a certificate just acknowledging her 25 years of service. So thank you, Miss Aldonia.
Thank you.
And we did have some signage created for you as well. So thank you for 25 years of service. She did complete that service on January 13th. So we love you, Miss Aldonia. And I'm actually here with Miss Aldonia and her sister, who was a 14-year vet with us, Miss Bernice O'Neill, and our HR manager, Miss Jackie Corney.
Hello.
So thank you so much, Miss Aldonia. We love you and miss you already so much.
Thank you.
And as lovely as Miss Aldonia is, she is very shy, so she has requested that she will not be giving us any, or are you changing your mind? Okay. She will not be delivering her speech today, but we did want to take the opportunity to acknowledge her in front of the board, as well as what we did throughout the last months of her service.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. 25 years of service. That is amazing.
Yes, it is.
And excellent service at that. She is a 2 million miler. So she has 2 million miles of safe driving under her belt.
Yeah.
And not to be outdone, Miss Bernice is well on her way. She's a 1 million miler. So it's a great driving family.
Thank you. I see it's a family affair.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your dedication to our ridership. We could not do this without you. We know that it is not the easiest of jobs to do, but we do appreciate your dedication. 25 years is amazing.
Yes.
Thank you for the safe rides. Thank you for allowing those that needed it to have a safe shepherd to get them where they needed to go. So we truly, truly do appreciate you and your years of service. To me, it sounds like you deserve a break. So I hope that you
Yes.
do enjoy your retirement. But know that you are missed, that you will be missed, your service will be missed, and we appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you to your 14 years of service here with the Go Raleigh family. We truly appreciate you too and your 1 million miles. And we don't look forward to your retirement, but we do look forward to your continued service. So we thank you both. Thank you both. And I hope that you have a plan or you go on a vacation or something, like you retire. What's your first order of business in retirement?
I plan to chauffeur my grandkids, and that's it.
Yes.
Giving out more rides.
Well,
That's it. And
I'm sure they have an amazing pilot to chauffeur them wherever they need to go. So I'm sure that you are the perfect person to transport your precious cargo. And we thank you for transporting us for 25 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
And Madam Chair, that concludes our additional items.
Thank you, David. All right, we do have public comment. I know that we have a couple comments to that, but we have a good 20 minutes. So let's jump straight in with our staff action items, if there are any. None, then they're information items. All right, the mobility management implementation study.
All right, so I'm not sure exactly how long this presentation is. I know that right now we're at about 15 minutes from 4. Mr. Walker, do you have an idea? Is this going to be about right for that time slot?
I think that should work pretty good. 15 to 20 minutes was about what I believe they were anticipating, and that may have included questions.
That's very good. All right. So, Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that we're not going to, extend that period too much if we got into something. So, thank you.
All right, no problem.
So this is David Walker. I'll do just real quick introduction. Mr. Bill Schwartz with Nelson Nygaard is the consultant working on the mobility management implementation study. And he's going to do a quick overview of what this study looks like. You'll see this in two phases. Today is just an initial presentation, and then they'll be coming back in a couple of months as they finalize this implementation study. They'll present it again, and then we'll at that time consider whether it's something that the city wants to participate in moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Schwartz. I am a principal with Nelson Nygaard in the Boston office. And we are working with directly for Campo, who are sort of the agent or manager of this study, which also includes the city of Raleigh, the town of Cary, and Wake County. If you could go to the next slide, please. I'll tell you a little bit about sort of the context for how we got here. As the Transit Authority receives funding from the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, and part of the one of the funding programs that is part of that you may be familiar with is known as the Section 5310 program, which is funding for older adults and people with disabilities. And it tends to cover the things that you don't already provide. Some of it is an overlap with your services you provide through your Go Raleigh Access, but it's trying to look at sort of filling in the gap. So in order to get that funding, every region has to put together a coordinated human services or coordinated public transit human services transportations, one of which was to put together a mobility management strategy and led to the formation of the Mobility Management Committee, which Go Raleigh participates in. And this was part of the coordinated plan, as you see on the slide. And really the focus is on service outside where the gaps are, and not so much the fixed route network or even the ADA, but the rest of the county and other places within the city where you don't have public transportation easily available. And as I mentioned, the goal here is to sort of serve the needs of older adults and people with disabilities primarily. So going to the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about what next slide the mobility management is. Essentially, it's kind of, next slide, please, kind of a concept really of trying to apply the principles of coordination. This first point of connecting the people with disabilities, seniors, and also low-income individuals with options, right, for transportation. And to do this well, it's sort of taking the principles of coordination that are talked about in that coordinated plan I just mentioned, and bring together all the different entities you see in the graphic on the right. So the government agencies, veterans agencies, the individual municipalities, people providing access to employment, people helping those in need with public services and so forth. And obviously the transportation providers are a key to that. So ultimately what we're trying to do is meet the needs of individuals who don't have access to services or who have some sort of barrier to that service. And the goal is to create kind of a centralized or one-stop shop where people can really find the service that meets their needs. So this is really about gathering all the different efforts and people that are involved in this into a sort of a more centralized function. So next slide, please, just talking about so if somebody has their job or part of their job to do mobility management, this involves being able to sort of advocate for the needs of that population I just mentioned, bringing people together, coming up with some specific, planning recommendations, and getting into sort of like a program that will be sustainable over time. Next slide, please. Sort of a question of who really will benefit, or sort of how would this work? Go to the next slide. from the agency standpoint, the sort of the framework is that a mobility manager can either work at a transit agency, work for a regional planning organization, work for a social service agency. And it doesn't, as I said before, it doesn't necessarily have to be your only role. It could be one of the things that you do. So if you are doing transportation, services, social services, helping people, sort of understand and navigate the system, the mobility management becomes part of that. And you're collaborating with this group of customers that we mentioned a moment ago. Now I want to talk a little bit about the study that we're doing that David mentioned a moment ago. If you can advance to just a couple of slides, one more. Sort of the goal of this study is sort of to begin to, as what we call sort of an education or baseline information. So we're sort of doing that today. We're reaching out to sort of educate people about what mobility management is. We're going to come forward with some information about what other regions do, and some good ideas, because this is important sort of for figuring out what might apply to the Campo Wake region, and then sort of look at ultimately, as David mentioned, sort of making that decision about level of participation or interest in participating in some type of mobility management program. Putting together a model of what that might look like, establishing those partnerships that would support it over time, what type of resources might be needed, and ultimately how you then roll it out to the public. That's the sort of the key piece. And then I think ultimately, just the next slide, we'll talk about the actual study, sort of how David mentioned the two phases. Next slide, please. The first one is this foundational, where we're gathering information, as I just mentioned, doing this review of other practices elsewhere, this conversations we're talking to various bodies within Raleigh, but also throughout the region, the different counties, individual communities, to just make sure that people understand this and get some of your questions as we get into this. We'll move into sort of a planning process of what a framework might look like. The white paper that's listed here is essentially like the first phase draft report, and proposing sort of like what an agreement might look like. Moving to the second phase, that's really once we sort of know who wants to be, next slide please, sort of part of this, we get into the details of implementation, how it might connect with the how you operate. And I will say just a quick point about that. It's important to know that what you do, both in terms of the fixed route and your paratransit program, the Go Raleigh Access, continue to operate in the same way. What one would hope would come out of this is that when someone needs to be able to access either the bus or the ADA services, they know who to call. And if you get a call for somebody who's looking for something that's outside of your service area, you know where to send them. It's as simple as that. I mean, it can go more than that, but ultimately it's about making the connections among the different providers in the region. I mentioned the outreach and engagement. That's like when you're going to roll it out, and then there's the final report. That's going to be next year, by the way. We can move forward just because I want to, in the interest of time, going forward, just in addition, the next slide, who's involved. I mentioned the funding partners. There's the coordination committee that was established out of the coordinated plan as part of this. And then there's a technical steering committee. Next slide, please. That's sort of listed on that page. You'll see who's a member of these. So we've reached out to everybody on this list and try to sort of tell them about the study, learn what some of their issues are, and begin to sort of get into what the possible needs might be. There's a next slide, please. This sort of quickly telling you there's some other cities that we're looking at for sort of how they do things. Jump to the next one. What happens in sort of the point of just sharing this with you is to say that each of these cities have a slightly different approach to mobility management, and ranging from having somebody who works for the transit agency in Austin to in Nashville getting funding to provide that for somebody to do that within the agency. In Columbus, it's done in Ohio, it's done at the state level, where there's somebody who's responsible for an entire region of the state. In Denver, the regional planning organization, Dr. Cog, similar to Campo, has a spin-off organization that does it. Charlotte, they're developing their program, and in San Francisco, you have sort of this group that's focused on a 2-person staff that covers the whole region. That's their only job. So The timeline for the project, I'm going to go over this pretty quickly because I kind of alluded to this, and I want to give you time for some questions here. But basically, where we are is we're engaging with you early. We're trying to inform you of what this is about. We're going to come back to you with sort of here's what we learned from the other cities, from talking to you, with sort of an initial framework to get some feedback on that, and sort of get some sense of it. You can jump to the next slide, please. And the second phase is really looking forward to, like for those people who are involved, how we would roll it out specifically. That's sort of the implementation piece of it. And then going on to the next slide here in terms of how we're engaging with you. In addition to making this presentation, thank you, there are 2 pieces of information. There's a short flyer explaining what mobility management is, and a more detailed 10-page document that gets into sort of like how this actually works or might work in the region. So moving into the next steps, what we're going to be doing, next slide, please, thank you. So basically, we're going to be back later this spring. We're going to be providing you the information on peers as well as sort of the foundational existing information. We'll share some of the ideas of what mobility management might look like and how it can benefit you and the customers that you have. And we'll also be looking to do some further engagement with you later on. Next slide, please. When we have the sort of draft report ready, we'll present it to the board again, and then sort of the final report would come at the next spring when we've got all that work done. I want to just move to the next slide, and this is the point where I want to ask 2 questions here. The first one is that do you understand what mobility management is at this point? Have I explained it well enough? Do you have any questions about what that really would look like? And sort of ask that question, and then subsequently see if there's anything that you think that sort of needs to be addressed in a mobility management program for Raleigh. So that's kind of it. I'm going to stop now and give you an opportunity. I think we have 6 minutes, so this will be a good chance for people to ask any questions. I'm going to take notes here, and hopefully, we'll look forward to coming back to you when we have sort of a more sort of framework of sort of what we learned from our conversations, our peer reviews, and this sort of compilation of information.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate your presentation. While anybody's gathering their questions, I do have one quick question. How many youth do we serve with the mobility implementation, and like how can we kind of increase that?
So I think that so in terms of anybody who fits into the category of sort of needing transportation services that aren't necessarily met by the services you provide. So I mean, I fundamentally, it's a good question. I think people who are looking for services through the services like other human services requests that people have would be part of that. Part of families that would be coming in looking for other services that may live outside the network or don't own a car, need to get to some place that's outside of your service area for whatever, those kinds of things. That's a role that a mobility manager would play. I mean, we think of it from the standpoint of being part of a family that's seeking services, but it tends to be, as these coordinated plans tend to organize around older adults and people with disabilities, but also people who are low income and need access to other services. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the younger people are the ones who tend to be riding public transportation. But I think this is really filling sort of outside of the service that you have.
Right. I'm asking because I personally know somebody whose mom recently had a stroke. They're a youth. They're still in they're in college. They're in college, and then they have a sibling that's in high school, and their mom can't transport them around, and where they are, they don't really have access. Like the routes aren't necessarily close to their place. So I'm just wondering, how can they utilize that if it's not, like, say, for their mom going to physical therapy or something like that, if it's for one of the children trying to get to school, college, or wherever, are they able to utilize this service also with and without their parent, or is this something that they have to use?
Right. So I think that's a great question. So the way that you would, I mean, right now, if you just sort of think about the process of navigating, how do you get around, right? You make contact, go Raleigh, you might try and find out, what buses are available or what other services. But if you're outside of the service area, like it's a great example. Like, well, so now what? What services are available, and who do you call, and what, are there any programs, and who would be able to sort of advocate for that program actually for service being added. And so one of the things we talk about is that you would have some sort of protocols in place for instances when somebody does need that help. And that would apply not just to you, your customer service teams, if somebody actually called Raleigh, but also the people in other departments in the city or in the county who are trying to help those individuals deal with it. So it could even be somebody in schools if somebody's school age. But the idea is that this becomes, we talked a little bit about outreach and publicity as a future task. You would want to promote that this service is available, that this resource is available to people as a way to at least try and make the connections. It may not be a solution, but at least you have a place to call and protocols in place for trying to address those unmet needs. Because that's often the case, that it's not the example of somebody who can ride the bus because the service exists. It's actually somebody who's trying to travel outside of service hours, or where there's no service and they can't get to that bus, or it doesn't take them where they need to go. This is about it's difficult, but this is trying to meet fill those gaps.
So then those kids but they're not kids, but they can utilize this service.
Well, so I just want to clarify, the service so mobility management is about making connections between the available, whatever's out there, and the needs that exist. And if there is nothing out there, beginning to make that sort of pull that information together to say, like, we're getting a lot of requests for this, but it is not about actually providing service. It's about making connections. So it's information sharing and linking people with options and reporting on what needs to be fulfilled going forward. There are lots of service providers out there, but they're not necessarily organized. That's what a purpose of a coordinated plan is.
Understandable.
Yeah, this is David Walker, City of Raleigh. Just to elaborate on that a little bit more, just think of this. This is not a new layer of transportation, but it's a new layer of communications and travel training, so to speak, that people will have access to help find ways to get and fill those gaps in transportation that there may be today.
Okay, it's like a collaborator. It's going to bring kind of the hub, bringing together the pieces.
Right.
All right, perfect. Does anybody else have any questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes. I don't know who said that. Sound like Nathan.
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, this is Linda Davis. I have one question, Madam Chair. I recently have been learning more about, aging in place and sort of a citizen's efforts to assist people as they're getting older to stay in their home longer, especially if they cannot afford or, do not want to go yet to assisted living facility. And so my question is, you're at that stage of coordinating, right? Finding out what's there and then trying to put in the coordination piece so that the communication will be more streamlined. Am I right about that?
Yeah, what I would say, the way that applies is that if somebody is, I like to talk about giving up driving or retiring from driving. A lot of times that's the case where somebody is not familiar with using public transportation if they're on a bus line, getting them to the point where they're comfortable doing that. But if they're outside of the network, then they begin to realize that, there's really very few options available short of paying somebody to drive them around. And the goal here is to at least make sure that that people that might be eventually helping them out, it could be somebody in an aging services role, it could be council on aging, senior, whatever knows that there's a mobility management program in the region, that these are the resources that exist, and begins to sort of make those linkages. But it's very much about supporting people, aging in place, or wherever they choose to age. They could move into the area as a retiree and eventually give up driving, whatever the case may be. And yes, so this is about, being able to support those kinds of things.
The biggest resource that I've found so far is an organization called Resources for Seniors, and it's a position in the city of Raleigh. But in their resource guide, they list go Raleigh, go Cary, go the regional transit. But one of the things, and they also list private transportation. I think that might be something you could probably coordinate with them already, because they were saying, especially during the pandemic, they've had so many people calling in to seek transportation, and then they don't hear back, or somebody says, well, just call a cab, and there's only one. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of prohibitions to where do you inquire. So you may already be coordinating with that office, Resources for Seniors, but it seems to be seeking the same thing your goal is.
Yeah, I think what happens in a lot of cases is that those organizations, everybody comes around to the fact that if you can't drive yourself around, you're limited. And it's a problem in anybody who's trying to help people out who are in that situation. So it's trying to make sure that like somebody reaches out to Resource for Seniors, and that Resource for Seniors knows about the mobility management resources that exist in the region and how to make the connections, so that it's not a lot of people pointing at each other.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question as well?
Yes, please.
This is Nathan Spencer. I really have just two. One is on your list of technical folks, I did not see the Alliance for Disability Advocates. I was curious why them, and I also did not see AARP. The other thing is, are you seeking input from technology firm? Because the amount of data that we have at this point, we could really ease the lives of older adults and those with disabilities using some of the data that we already know, and the city of Raleigh is picking up from their own access program to be able to make access a little easier and pick up some more regular.
Okay, to answer your first question is the Alliance for Disability Advocates is not part of the technical steering committee. I believe I've heard mention of them. My experience with AARP, I don't know if the Raleigh or the North Carolina chapter is focused on this, is that because I've been very involved in the one where I live in New Hampshire, is that I mean, they have a great program at the national level, sort of to try and support age-friendly communities and to do things around supporting transportation options. But I'm not sure that there's a specific role for them on this, sort of, or whether they would actually be interested in participating in this. But certainly something to follow up. As far as
not to interrupt, AARP is involved in the BRT planning.
Right.
Here, so they are involved in some of that stuff.
Okay, all right. If you can pass along the contact, that would be really appreciated. As far as the technology, the one thing I can say about that, so we're not going to get involved in like understanding the patterns of drive. This is about it's more of a policy and coordination piece of work than it is to analyze travel patterns and so forth. But I will say that there is an important consideration about the technology strategy for the region with respect to transportation. And we, in our work that we'll talk about when we come back next month, when we summarize sort of all the studies that have been done, we pointed out that the policy or technology strategy that has been developed for the region is focused on fixed route and doesn't really talk much about demand response, which is the reservation, or whether you're calling for the trip today or you're booking it ahead, that's demand response. And that there's a technology element there as well, and you really want to try and coordinate that so that you can take advantage of what's happening in that space. For those of you who don't know, things like microtransit or same day service where you, just like Uber and Lyft, you can use your phone to request a van trip, and being able to integrate that with other public transportation resources is really where we want to go. And just by the way, as part of the Wake bus plan work that we're involved in, that's part of the conversation as well, to try and encourage regional collaboration around that kind of technology. So I thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Hey, and this is David Walker, City of Raleigh again, just to, again, follow up on that. Bill, the reason you recognize the Mayor's Committee for Disability Advocates is they are a stakeholder, and we are actually presenting to them the same presentation next week. So they are and will be engaged.
Thank you.
I know Bill's got a long list of stakeholders that he's presenting to.
All right, Jen, it looks like you had a question.
I did just have a quick question. I'm sort of translating some of your presentation to thinking about this as like sort of resource marketing guidance for people to know how to plug into our systems, which is exciting. But I'm thinking about one of the things that's recently come up from Wake County schools with the bus driver shortages that they're having is sort of almost every other day email reminders to us as parents to check for the buses and make other plans for what to do if we don't have a school bus. And so I'm curious if providing transit alternatives that aren't, oh no, I have to go find someone who has a car, which I know I personally experienced to take my kid to school. Like, is that a piece of this? I think it gets a little bit at what the chair was talking about in terms of, is this just for seniors or are we talking about something that's across ages?
That's a really interesting question. What I would say about that is that the only thing that comes to mind is that you would want, like a mobility manager, somebody doing mobility management, whether it's their entire job or part of their job, would be able to serve as a resource that would make the connections with the services that are out there. It wouldn't be, I would be surprised for it to be like, you call me up and you want, I would be able to give you information about which school bus to take. But if the school bus isn't running and there's a bus available, I would be able to help with that, right? So, it's a clearinghouse information resource, making connections. The focus tends to be on the places where the service doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean that you can't try and work toward a goal where you have a way, like if you happen to reach the person or that's responsible for mobility management, they would know what to do with the question, right? They would know to say, all right, well, I can connect you with the bus that's in your neighborhood and find the customer service team to help you with that, or I have the information available for you. But yeah, the goal would be that whoever's involved in this space is able to make those kinds of links for people to when the challenges come up. So it's not excluding anyone. There's a focus, right? Because it's really on where the gaps are, and because the funding tends to focus on services for the groups we mentioned at the beginning, that tends to be the emphasis, but it's not exclusion. It doesn't exclude anyone.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I guess I would just say then that I think that a gap worth considering is because we have quite a robust county busing system as part of our school system, which is a bit unique. A gap worth considering is how do kids get to school or parents get to school for after school functions if they can't drive.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, LaTanya Williams has a question.
All right, thank you.
So my question is, I guess part of like phase 2 is implementation. And I know like some of the challenges is for seniors trying to get access to like Go Access, or was it Wake Access, and Go Wake. So would this implementation person help someone sign up for the systems? Because it seems like, for instance, my mom had a challenge. She had a eye doctor's appointment, and with eye doctor's appointments, sometimes you can't see
after the appointment. So she tried to sign up for the program, but they was told she had to fill out an application, have proof of Medicaid and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay, my appointment is in 2 days. It's not going to get improved. So like, how can we simplify for people to, I guess, sign up for the Go Wake and Go Access, where that person can do that, make this form, or maybe fill out the form for them, potentially do it within an hour versus like a week process? That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I would say the answer to that is unlikely that would be a function that you'd be able to really accomplish, just because, first of all, but the referral piece, I think, would be something that, I know that's not a great answer, right? But at least the person in that role or people in that role would be able to say, okay, they would understand whether or not this is something that would be viable as a potential solution. And the publicity, I'm sorry about it, but you would essentially refer someone to Go Wake Access, and in any instance, whether it's a temporary or permanent disability, and the staff there would be in the best position to help with sort of the application process. But I think that the publicity part of it would be maybe to say that individuals who know that there's a service out there, that they would need to get access to it very far in advance to get approved, those kinds of things. So the person would be able to say things like, not just call these people, but the kinds of services that exist in the region and these are the requirements to become eligible for them, and this is the kind of timeline. So they would have that information available. I had to deal with a similar situation with my own parents in getting access to Medicaid transportation, and it's not easy at all, and to figure it out. And so I think you would want to be able to, a good mobility management program would be able to explain how to do it, not so much do it for you.
So probably in the phase 2 of implementation of this program, and this is probably for all of the entities, probably maybe looking to simplify the process, because I think we should get away from physical applications, because if someone has to go to a Go Raleigh station or any station to pick up an application, that defeats the purpose of what the person needs. They have to get a taxi or whatever to fill out this form. So I think these forms should be online. So as you implementing this whole process, kind of think of ways, how can this person that's giving out information can provide information to someone over the phone, like say, oh, let me email you this application. Let this application be like a PDF file that they actually can fill out online versus physically going out to these particular stations or whatever the case may be, because the whole purpose is they can't get there. They can't get to where they're trying to go. So I think some of these hinders, we're making it hard for our riders of all stages.
I'm familiar with what you're talking about. And what I would say is that this project is not going to tackle that, but I think it's an important consideration that the mobility management function within, if the city of Raleigh becomes a party to this, that would be a consideration that you would say that we'd want to have this individual be able to pass that along to the Go Raleigh staff and so forth. But I think there's also, this is work that goes on outside of this project. This project is the implementation piece is going to be about, how the framework that we are going to talk about and the next time we come back to sort of like would actually be played out. And I'm sure we'll talk about this again, but I'm sure David's about to follow up on me. This is that piece of, sort of addressing that need is not part of this project.
Yeah, and this is David Walker again. And so one of the things Bill mentioned earlier was the mobility coordinating committee. It's also a function or a committee of the Campo organization. It is doing just what you were saying. It's looking at all the different providers and the things that were put into that coordinated plan that Bill also talked about, for all of the providers. Is looking to how can we make things simpler, easier for the end user. So we're going through that process now. Unfortunately, a lot of the users of these programs are not very high tech, and they want you to put an application in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and mail it to them so they've got a piece of paper to fill out. but we are going through those processes to see how we can streamline and make things a little bit simpler where and when we can.
Right. Well, at least have multiple options of people get the application. So, and probably not just limit to Medicaid, because not everyone's on Medicaid, but they still have, they still have a disability, but may not be on Medicaid. But that's it for me.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Bill. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your expertise answering all these questions that we have. All right, so we're gonna then move to, well, there were 2 questions. I don't know if we had an opportunity, but if we can have those possibly emailed, what are gaps that we see in our community that could be filled with mobility management program? And if there's any other way outside of the questions that we've already had, but if as we go along, we think of other gaps that we see in our community, let's try to compile those and see if we can get them to Bill and let that be like a living space for us. All right, thank you. And thank you again, Bill. All right, so let's pause really quickly so that we can go to our public comments. We're about 18 minutes behind. So since we're 18 minutes over 4 o'clock, and I know that we have one that was a written in comment, and then we have one person who would like to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. We did have one emailed comment. To my knowledge, that individual was not able to join us today, so he did request that we read the comment aloud. Mr. Walker, do you have that handy, or I can certainly bring that up if you do not?
I do have it.
All right, thank you. And Madam Chair, if that's okay, we'll go ahead and read this, and then we can go to our single caller today.
Yep, let's do it.
All right, thank you.
All right, again, David Walker, City of Raleigh, and I'm speaking on behalf of Michael Curley, Kerley. Address is 5529 Cotton Rose Lane, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27606. And his statement reads as follows. I have a few comments regarding the Avent Ferry Route 11. Where I live on Avent Ferry, I have a 30-minute walk to the nearest Go Raleigh bus stop, and it has significant portions of the trip down Tryon. I'm not sure why the 11 route cuts off at Avent Ferry to go down Gorman, but there are a significant number of people who live down the remaining segment of Avent Ferry who do not have a reasonable connection to the Raleigh Transit Network. Additionally, Lake Johnson is not connected by a bus line to the Raleigh Transit Network except by the Buck Jones connector. This is a point of some inconvenience for me, and I would imagine for many others who would like to better utilize Raleigh Transit. Thank you for your time, Michael Curley. That's the end of his statement.
Thank you for that. Any feedback from the authority on Michael, you said Curry?
Curley, Kerley.
Michael Curley's comment. Jen?
I would just say that I concur, having frequently ridden and attempted to walk the sections between Tryon, even at 8 or 9 months pregnant, and the 11, those connections are few and far between. And I think I've said before that when we think of future routes and frequencies, that we do need to consider those connections. In many ways, we overly rely on NC State buses and that area of town, and they only go so far. And when we get down to Gorman and Tryon and that part of this district, which is increasingly being redeveloped with apartments, we do need to look at that as we look at our future planning and any sort of adjustments that can be made as funding allows.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, this is David with the city again. If you'd like to refer this to route committee, it's something that staff could definitely put together some information and bring back to that committee or to the board, whichever you would prefer.
Yes, actually I would. So is that cool with you, Nathan, that you all kind of go over this and dissect this in the route committee?
Yeah, I was just actually looking up the route. So yes, please.
All right, thank you. All right, let's move on then to the next comment so we can jump back into the business, and that is with Mr. Dwight Spencer.
Hello, Madam Chair and authority members. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, I'm Dwight Spencer, and I'm the executive director with North Carolina Transit Workers Association, better known as NCTAA. And I want to say to Madam Chair, Nathan, and Ms. Karen, and any other members that was reappointed to the Transit Authority by the City Council, welcome back to the authority, and we look forward as a community, as a city, for your expertise and serving the citizens of Raleigh and Wake County. And you've done such a great job. I guess City Council felt like y'all need to come back and continue your great job. So I do want to say that. I also want to present I'm not going to read this whole proposal, request proposal that will be going statewide on behalf of the association. It's a safety proposal request. I did send an email over to Nathan Spencer, Madam Chair. Your email keeps bouncing back on me for some odd reason or another. And I did ask Mr. Spencer if he got that email, that he would forward the email to the other authority members. The mayor and 2 city council members, Councilman Branch and Councilman Ford, also received the same email. And the proposed email, and before I get into this, I'm not going to read this whole proposal. I'm just going to run through it right quickly because of y'all time. But I do want to say thank you to Mr. David Eaton, David Walker, and the entire City of Raleigh Transit staff for their hard work that they have put into this contract, the restructuring of the contract, new restructuring of the contract. So I do want to commend them for their hard work and making sure that their transit contract can be as attractive as it possibly can to possibly bring in another company to oversee this transit service here in Raleigh. Our proposal, the NCTAA proposal request is requesting statewide that the cities and towns across North Carolina provide the N95 and the K95 masks for all bus operators and behind-the-scenes transit workers. We do understand that the numbers are continuing to go up. We think the bus operators need to be protected. As most of you know, the CDC saying that the N95 mask is the most protective mask. Most bus operators wear designer masks, cloth masks, turtleneck masks, and which those masks are not safe at all. It is a federal transit mandate that bus operators and rail operators do wear their mask, and we want to make sure that they are protected statewide. And we just feel that every city and town needs to provide the N95 masks to their bus operators, whether they're under contract or work directly for the city or town across North Carolina. We do understand that there are some cities and towns that are providing the N95 and some management companies providing the N95 mask. And I'll get to that as far as our management here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Go Triangle, I have been holding conversation with Mr. Chuck Lakuta, who his name is Charles, but I call him Chuck, the CEO of Go Triangle, and they are putting towards that effort and also asking bus operators to only wear the N95 mask for their protection. So we are proposing that to city transit staff that the Go Raleigh bus operators and behind-the-scenes transit workers, we asking that you please provide these masks for these bus operators. We do, from my understanding, with the phone calls and emails we've been getting from Go Raleigh drivers and transit workers, that TransDev have provided some masks, but they're not giving them out like talking about it, maybe one mask or so. But these masks come 5 in a pack. You can wear these masks up to 5 days. I myself personally have obtained some, so I got 2 packs sometimes, so you can wear those masks up 5 days. And if these bus operators are given these masks to wear, then this is what they should wear the mask. And they should not be just given one mask and be giving them out like they got a hold on them or whatever, but we think that the management company should do that, you know, provide those masks for them. So we do hope that the City of Raleigh Transit provide these masks. I did hold conversation on Tuesday with Mr. David Ellis, Wake County Manager, and I did ask him to partner with City of Raleigh Transit to make sure that the N95 mask is provided for our bus operators and transit workers. We think that's very important. He's supposed to get back with me by tomorrow, no later than Monday. And just for notation, if the health department, agencies here in Wake County and other nonprofit organizations are giving out thousands of masks for the protection of everybody that want to be protected from these viruses that we are experiencing, we feel that the City of Raleigh, not only the City of Raleigh, but every city across North Carolina should be providing these bus operators and transit workers with masks with no questions asked. And it should be mandated that these bus operators, especially our bus operators, wear these masks until further notice. And because just alone, the Wake County Health Department has given out over 130,000 N95 masks, and Wake County alone have given out over, they have been given over 200,000 masks alone just in Wake County. And so we do want our bus operators protected. We know that these masks are in very high demand. And so we hope that the City of Raleigh Transit will accept. This is only a proposal request. We're going to follow up on these cities and towns across North Carolina. I have had an opportunity to talk with some of them, and they said they are doing just that. So we are very pleased with them, and we commend them for doing that and protecting the bus operators and transit workers. And like I say in all of my PSAs on behalf of the NCTAA, we always encourage bus operators to wear their masks. We also encourage them to encourage passengers to wear their masks, but we encourage them most definitely not to get into a confrontation over a mask. They are to contact their supervisor or their local police, because we don't want to see our bus operators put themselves in any type of physical danger over a mask. You know, it's not worth it. So we do hope that Raleigh follow behind the other cities and towns and help provide these masks. You know, we know that, you know, y'all are getting federal funds from all over the place, and we do hope that that be a part of these masks that they're giving away. Secondly, I do want to address this to Go Raleigh, and if the general manager is in this meeting, I hope that he hear this. There is a bus operator. We have received at least 15 emails and calls from drivers about one particular driver, Mr. Rodney Turpentine, not wearing his mask. It has been reported to the GM, and nothing has been done. He is putting his co-workers in danger, and we are hoping that the management at Go Raleigh on Poole Road address this to this bus operator and make sure that he's wearing his mask. Because if he can't wear his mask, he don't need to be employed and represent the City of Raleigh. That's our stand on it. We're going to advocate for safety like we do everything else, and we feel like the time that we are in now is very important, because these bus operators have to go back home to their families and their children. And that is so important, because their families want them protected. And so we think about their families too, as well as the bus operators and transit workers. Also, Madam Chair, before I leave you, I do want to ask one question that y'all are supposed to get back with us as far as our president serving on this recommendation committee that was put in place. We did do our own research. I don't know what the answer may be to it, but other cities and towns do have citizens at large serving on their recommendation committee. So we still are requesting that our president serve on this committee as we move forward. And lastly, we want to know, when will the bid for the new contract go out? Or has it already been put out? So we would like to get that answer as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dwight. Are is there any feedback to Dwight's questions about having somebody on the transit authority, getting these masks out, making sure that we're protecting our operators so that they're not having to have any confrontations with people over masks?
I think Mr. Byron Bryant is on the line. Byron, can you address the existing mask policy and your protocols currently?
Yes, sir. Byron Bryant with Go Raleigh. I'm the general manager. Thank you, Mr. Ewing. Thank you, Madam Chair. Addressing the mask, we do distribute the KN95 mask. We did also, I think we began that on the 2nd or 3rd, I don't recall the exact date, forgive me for that, as well as we do have a recurring order for those masks. So operators have access to utilize their own mask, the traditional surgical mask or the KN95 mask. We do also still distribute masks to the public via the buses and at the Go Raleigh station booths. And our policy is to adhere to the federal mandate from the FTA regarding the mask policy. Everyone in this building is required to wear a mask. And speaking of the KN95 masks, those are available to all employees, including those that work in the building. So you can get those masks at our nurse station where you have to screen before entering, the parts department for maintenance employees, and the dispatch desk primarily for bus operators and other operation employees.
All right, and
I had a question.
thank you, Mr. Bryant. And I'm sorry, was there any other questions there?
Can you hear me, David?
Yes, sir.
Hey, how you guys doing? I know Rodney was referring to the operator that was not wearing his mask. Has anyone, I wanted to know, and I feel like he said it hadn't covered a long span of time that the gentleman wasn't wearing a mask, but I'd also like to understand, is there a health concern that the gentleman is not wearing his mask? Has anyone probed him to kind of ask, is there like a health concern that he's
Generally speaking, I would say that
he is not
yeah, I'm sorry you're breaking up there, but I'm sorry you were breaking up, but to talk about the mask there, generally speaking, that is against policy. So if somebody was caught doing that would result in progressive disciplinary action via the collective bargaining agreement, the CBA. I certainly don't think we can talk about a particular employee. But Mr. Bryant, I don't want to get out of my lane here, but that's just my general thought, if you want to correct me.
No, sir, that's exactly right, Mr. Eastman. That's why I elected not to address that question. We do not discuss personnel matters outside of, and discipline matters, for that matter, in public forums, so to speak. So, what I can tell you is that I myself and my supervisor staff, including dispatch, we do address those situations when we encounter them. We have received calls from the public, and those things are managed and handled.
And Madam Chair, real quick, I'm sorry, that looks like, Madam Chair, there's other questions there if you want to recognize them.
Yes, it looks like Jen had a question.
I was just curious. I was looking up as we were talking. It looks like that the TSA FTA mandate is set to expire currently on March 18th, which is fairly close to our next meeting, which presumably after that date, no masks would be required. I'm curious if there is any desire by the board to require them, or any ability of us to do something like that if the federal mandate was to lapse.
I want to answer and say that I think it would be hard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I don't think that we can force a mandate that's not federally supported for public transit, or am I wrong?
So, Madam Chair, I'm certainly not the expert here on the legal process for mask, but just by virtue of looking at our environment locally, certainly by mayor proclamation, she can do certain things within the jurisdiction of the city of Raleigh, as other towns throughout Wake County have made decisions for their jurisdictions. Whether that would apply on a bus or is something that I can look into, but I do not have the answer on today.
I think that regardless of where we fall at that time, I think that we as an or Go Triangle needs to continue to provide masks to its operators, regardless of whether we require them to use masks or not.
I would certainly think that we would always make the mask available for sure.
I agree with Josh. I think that us making the mask available is important. I don't know if we can force anyone to do it. And I'm a little slow on wanting to push that because I can see in other places around the country where they're becoming confrontational, just asking somebody to do it. And I think the bus drivers are already having some measure of that they're dealing with. So I wouldn't want to give them any more to put up with. I would just ask that we have signage on the bus that talks about the requirement of wearing masks on bus, that we make sure that the operators and everyone else is wearing a mask, and that we provide extra masks for those that come on and don't have one. But I don't want us to, I just don't want us to put our bus drivers in a situation where they may have to end up fighting somebody over simply asking them to wear a mask. Especially with everything else that we've been trying to make sure that, we feel through with them. So I just want us to be mindful of that.
Madam Chair.
Mm-hmm.
This is Nathan Spencer. On the other note of representation on the board, I have been trying to get an operator on the route committee for a while because just as feedback, not as a voting member. So if that's any reflection, I'd like to see that happen, but also I'm open to having someone with on the street experience being able to provide us with background. I don't know if that's equaling vote, but definitely with the ability to give us some color on decisions that we're making.
Thank you for that. Anybody else?
Just to go back, I think given the timing of our next meeting, if we could get an answer on what we can or can't do so that at our next meeting we can make some of those mask decisions. I think I fall in line with the comments that everyone was making, but I would like to be sure that we know what we can and can't do by the March meeting.
Okay, so I would like to.
My apologies. I was just making clarification. That is in regards to masks, correct?
Yes.
All right, well, I would like to kick that to policy and finance. So that the next meeting we can, if you all can kind of hash through and figure that out before we actually get together as a group to find out what we can and cannot do when it comes to mandating or pushing for masks or anything like that on our buses. All right, are there any other questions in regards to Dwight's questions? Comments? All right, perfect. Thank you, Dwight. We always appreciate your insight and keeping us accountable. So we're going to start the Transit Authority meeting back at 4:41, and we're going to jump into the next information item, which is the RTA retreat overview and next steps.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to do a quick little presentation on the retreat. I appreciate everybody that was able to participate in the retreat in December at the end of 21 there. It was virtual, but I thought it was really a great retreat to be virtual. Those that were able to attend were really engaged. You were attentive. You had some great ideas. So I just want to say thank you for that. I did send out the retreat summary today. So if you see something in that document and you're like, that's not what I meant when I said that, or that's not how we interpreted that particular statement, that's what I'm looking for. So please make sure you provide us with feedback on context of how we took notes and interpreted what the board
Dwight Spencer
wanted. But
has left the meeting.
and again, just look that over and let us know if you have any comments. One of the items within that summary is this, and this is kind of a vision tree or flower really, and it takes some of the ideas that you had and tries to come up with big ideas, and then all of the smaller ideas that support that as we went through that process. Next slide, Andrea. So when you think about what we just looked at, some of the key things that you voted for as we went through that exercise was really recognizing that, our frequency on our routes could still be a lot better, as well as our late night and early hours, especially, in the support of work and employee transportation could certainly improve. Route and system maps, board showed a really strong interest in having stop level information. And so we're going to be looking at, strategies for that. Better communication and engagement, which is always important. Collaboration with other city departments, increased, connectivity with our routes, regional coordination, as well as always on a list somewhere is better passenger amenities, for the system as well. Andrea, next slide. So that particular list was really things that the board can do, directly, and quite honestly, it can charge staff to go forth and to implement or at least come up with strategies to accomplish those goals. But there's also some indirect influence items that the board really thought about and brought to the forefront in that tree that we saw earlier. That's land use planning, affordable housing, considering unhoused populations, coordinating again with regional partners, mixed use development along transit corridors. How can you live, play, work within a transit environment? Ultimately reducing vehicle miles traveled and your transportation cost, and really also supporting the transit workforce and making Go Raleigh a great place to work. So again, I just wanted to kind of go through this quickly today. What I'm looking for is a little bit of feedback from the board. We've got some great items on that slide before the indirect items that we can, as staff, turn into action items in committees. So we can start out by letting you digest this, and we'll bring it back next month and we can talk about it at the full board. Or if the board would like to send the full retreat summary or either components of the summary to a particular standing committee, that would be fine. Or the third or the final option is you could just create a new ad hoc committee to deal with the retreat. But again, we at staff level are really interested in digging in and getting some action items out of the information that you provided. We think that there's some things that we're already doing that we need to highlight better because that's low-hanging fruit for us. I think that you mentioned things that we can actually just go out and grab and bring back and say, hey, these are great things that either we've already started on or we're doing. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you for that. Do we need to make a decision on that right now, or is that something that we can circle back to?
If you do not give me direction now, what we'll do is we'll bring the retreat information back to the full board next month once you have time to digest the report, and then we can go from there.
All right. I would suggest that we have some time to read it over since I know that we just got it. So we have some time to read it over for those that haven't had a chance to, and then we can make an informed decision at our next meeting.
All right, thank you.
Are there any questions from anyone else in regards to the RTA retreat overview and next steps? All right, so we're going to jump to the station area planning with Jason Harden.
Yes, good afternoon, members of the authority. Jason Harden with the city's Planning and Development Department. So I'm going to go through an update on the New Bern Avenue station area planning process and want to get some feedback and certainly questions answered if there are some. As an overview, I think probably many of you are familiar with this, it is not looking at the transit itself. So the bus rapid transit design process which is well underway, is looking at that. This is looking more at some of those topics that I noted looked like were discussed at the retreat, thinking about affordability and density and supportive land uses and pedestrian connections and all those really important considerations that have to be there to get the maximum benefit out of transit. So this is a conversation with the community that has unfolded over the last year or so. We've had a number of public input events, online surveys, some in-person workshops, have heard from a fairly large number of people during that process. We're getting close to the end, but there's not a locked in final document yet. So that's one reason I wanted to have the chance to hear from y'all today, because we still are making some adjustments and revisions before this does get finalized. And then it goes through the same kind of review and approval process that I think y'all would use for service changes. So this would go to the city's planning commission and then city council for their review and ultimate adoption. So next slide, please. So the big picture considerations of this process, I've touched on a couple. I know many of you are familiar with work that we've done on a broader scale, thinking about planning around our transit investments. And this is building on that in a more specific way, and including a lot of more specific public outreach along New Bern Avenue as a core part of it. So some of the topics include zoning changes, policy changes, looking at new investments that address affordable housing needs. Certainly the ability to walk safely to stations is critical. Every transit user and most everybody else at some point in their day is a pedestrian. And then also, and I think just as importantly, thinking about the built environment. That can either be really hostile to people using transit, where you have a lot of buildings fronted by big parking lots and the pedestrian, the transit user is an afterthought, or you can design places that are conducive to people walking and taking transit. And so that's another big part of what this study has been looking at. And so we can go to the next slide. And so just a quick look at the public engagement overview. We had those week-long workshops at multiple locations along the corridor at Tarboro Community Center and Roberts Park, and one outside the Beltline as well. We did interviews with long-term residents along the corridor and started to tell, and we have a really great video I'm going to put in a plug for called The Story of New Bern, that let people tell that story in their own voices. And we learned a lot from, again, hearing from people's perceptions about what New Bern is, what the history of it is, and what it can be in the future. We also had some very specific, we called them summits, to focus on some of those key topics. So housing affordability with residents and affordable housing providers, and then on pedestrian safety as well, to think about some things that go beyond what we've typically done to ensure some safe and comfortable places for people walking. Next slide. And so we've heard some really clear themes. One is people recognize that changes are happening, but we talked about what comes along with changes. So people generally, in the abstract, sometimes have some concerns about change, but if, and this is the goal of the process, we can tie those changes to some broader goals, such as providing more affordability or improving walkability, then there's started to be more clear support for that. And then we asked a question about affordability, and we didn't just ask about affordability, we asked about deep affordability, looking at housing that's affordable to people at 60% or 50% or 30% of the median income. And people felt like it was really important to address those particular segments of the housing market in this planning process. And we heard that really clearly. Next slide, please. We can go on. I've got a couple of headers, and I'll just for expectation's sake, I don't have a huge number of slides, and I'm going to go through pretty quickly, probably about another 10 more, and then wanted to leave room for your feedback or questions. So specifically, this is probably my most detailed slides. I don't really like to have slides with a whole bunch of bullet points, but I did want to take a moment on this one because it's probably the number one topic that we've focused on, housing affordability. So these are the recommendations, these bullets that we're looking at. One big one is land acquisition for new affordable housing, and that is beyond pretty, I'm sure many of you are familiar with a number of projects that are in the works or set to begin. There's more than 1,000 units in that category, not talking about anything that exists now, but that's on the way. So this is above and beyond that. And I think there's going to be a very large supply of new affordable housing along New Bern Avenue in particular. And I would note that this is a focus, and you've heard me in the past talk about affordability along all the bus rapid transit corridors. That's a priority. And we've actually gone ahead and launched some zoning changes along some of the other corridors, not New Bern, some of the other corridors aimed at incentivizing affordability. And along New Bern in particular, this is a key one, and I'll talk about in a little bit some of the zoning changes that we're looking at recommending as part of this process. So I touched on this before, but a focus on low income and very low income households when we talk about affordability. So this is where the third bullet, where the zoning changes come in. So to be taller than the zoning would permit, the new buildings would have to include a percentage of affordable units to go, again, higher than that base zoning. Also, just allowing more housing supply in general. That's one, to support the transit investment and provide more housing choice, but also reduce competition. We know that that is a big reason for the affordability issues in Raleigh. There isn't the amount of choice that people are looking for across the city in walkable areas. So the competition for what's there gets really intense, and a lot of people get priced out. A new funding source. So many of you, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the recent affordable housing bond, $80 million bond passed by the voters of the city of Raleigh. This would be on top of that, what we're calling an equity fund. Still doing some work as to exactly how much that fund could be and what it could fund along the corridor. But the concept of using that for some of these goals, for land acquisition, for additional support for existing homeowners with repairs, major repairs, and homeownership expenses such as increased property taxes. And working with the state to acquire the DMV site. It's a big lift anytime we work with the state, but we think that if we can deliver a shared vision for what that site can be, and it's based on hearing from the community, then that makes a more compelling rationale for approaching the state and saying, this is something that the city of Raleigh would like to be a partner with you on. I skipped over one bullet, but that is looking at prioritizing when it comes to affordable units, current and former residents of the area when there's new units coming online. So next slide, please. Also, a lot about support for existing businesses along the corridor. Those are longtime stakeholders who we want to make sure that these changes and investments benefit existing small businesses and that it supports their ability to continue on this corridor in the future. So one, making sure that we're communicating with and providing support to businesses during the construction, but looking more broadly, creating a community-based center. That could be anything from a new storefront to an existing community center. But the main idea being that we have staff there that could provide information where residents or businesses or others could come and access information about funding for, say, homeowner repairs or any kind of small business support. So that information is easier because it's physically there on the corridor for people there to access. The DMV site, a lot of great feedback during those workshops about what that site could potentially include. It's a big site, as you all know. Certainly affordability is something we heard a lot about, but also employment generating uses. And it's long been a place on the corridor where many people who live on the corridor work. That kind of employment is really important. We heard a lot about that. Also, the potential for creating space for new small businesses and incubator space where there's support for their rent or other business needs. We've had some great conversations with the university, who is very interested in having a very prominent presence on New Bern itself and along Tarboro Street, more of a campus main street than they've had traditionally. That's something that they're really interested in. They're working on their own planning, long-term planning process, but interested in partnering with the city as well. And the city certainly wants to work with the university on supporting their mission. And then lastly, and the name is a working title, but the idea of a district that celebrates and supports the history and culture of New Bern Avenue, and that includes business support, public art, celebration of history and community. You might think of a little Havana in Miami, different districts and cities around the country that do that and not only support the culture that's there, but say this is something that the city values and wants to continue to maintain over the years. So next slide, please. And I'm going to move through a little bit more quickly. I wanted to talk in depth about the affordability and business support, but history and culture in general. I know it's going to be hard to really dive into some of these maps, and we can get you a copy of the slides afterward. But telling the story, again, going back to the story of New Bern Avenue, the neighborhoods along it, the history and culture, we don't tell that in a big way. We don't have it told in monuments, in art, in our environment in the way that it deserves. So looking at history trails, I'm looking at some gateway features that again tell that story, say this is what New Bern Avenue has been and will continue to be, is a big recommendation here. And we have, again, that's something that the Equity Fund can help support when it comes to creating new public art that would supplement a lot of the art that will happen as part of the BRT stations themselves. I know you're familiar with that, but this is looking not just along the corridor, but along some of those connections, Tarboro Street being one of them, but other places where we can continue to build on the historic assets and culture that is there and tell that story even more clearly. Next slide. So looking at mobility, again, this is a pretty busy map. In a nutshell, it's the idea of creating more of those first mile, last mile connections. Where are there sidewalk gaps where they don't exist? Where are there some intersections that are really not built right now for people walking, particularly outside the Beltline? That describes some of those intersections at Trawick and Corporation and New Hope. So in some cases, just some pretty basic improvements with sidewalks and crossings and improved street lighting is what this plan is recommending. Again, just recognizing that every transit user is a pedestrian and we need to deliver that comfortable environment for them. Next slide. So a couple of those key locations, Trawick Road and Corporation Parkway, New Hope Road, all outside the Beltline where the BRT route concludes. And then within the Beltline, Sunnybrook Road, Raleigh Boulevard, Tarboro Street, Swain and Hargett, all some that we've identified as some near-term priorities. Longer term, looking at some bigger investments, obviously one of the biggest barriers in this whole area is the Beltline itself. And it is very, very difficult to get from, say, Wake Med and Sunnybrook Road towards the Beltline or across the Beltline. And yet, clearly, you can see it every day. People are making that trip. And we don't know how many more don't make that trip that might serve their daily needs just because it's so uncomfortable. So looking at some safer ways to get across the Beltline is, in a longer term, one of the recommendations coming out of this project. Next slide. Open space and parks and public realm. So there are actually a lot of parks along this corridor. One of the recommendations is making more connections to the Crabtree Greenway that runs through the area more on the eastern side of the corridor. and also potentially a new park as the landfill, which was closed some decades ago, becomes eligible for new purposes, potentially a major new public space on that eastern end of the corridor, south of New Bern along New Hope Road. Next slide. And then finally, getting back to that zoning topic and what we call the Transit Overlay District, TOD overlay. And what that does, it has some real specifics to it that have to do with supporting transit, supporting affordability. So I talked about allowing more height in exchange for inclusion of units that are affordable at 60% of the median income or below. A bonus in height for employment generating uses. Again, part of transit is getting to jobs and opportunity. So making sure that we're incentivizing or leveraging the transit investment to allow more people to get to employment opportunities. Removing parking requirements and prohibiting auto-oriented uses that, again, make it harder for people to walk and feel comfortable as pedestrians along the corridor, and requiring that new buildings, as development occurs, front the street, create that more comfortable pedestrian space, include bicycle parking and other transit amenities. Next slide. And so this is, again, is one of those busier maps. And I'll note that as we get to the end of this process, we're going to create a couple of different maps that convey this information in a simpler way, because I will readily acknowledge that there's a lot happening in this map. But to walk through it pretty quickly, what those different colors are showing are the existing zoning districts, which for the most part, this process is not proposing to change. What you see there, it's a little hard to see, but in the thicker black line that mostly falls along the corridor, that is where that transit overlay district would be applied. So again, that doesn't change on its own. The zoning, it makes those provisions that we looked at on the previous page go into play. So incentivizing affordability, looking at incentivizing job generating uses and so on. And I think we have a couple more slides. This is looking at future heights, and this is based on that earlier planning process that we called equitable development around transit. And again, looking at how we can incentivize more affordability and allow more people to live and work along these corridors, so that pinkish color further on the eastern side of the corridor is where heights could be 7 stories with that additional bonus from the TOD overlay on top of that. And then heights a little bit less as we get closer to downtown. Of course, downtown, much taller buildings. There's a little bit more of a fine-grained, smaller lot existing condition in that area. So generally not as easy or conducive to taller heights there, but still, again, allowing more people to live and work there and encouraging, incentivizing affordability. Next slide. So this is the remaining steps of the public process. There's always a lot of process to a larger plan like this. So this month, probably a little bit into March, finalizing the plan document. And I would note that a lot of these draft recommendations that I've been talking through are available on the city's webpage. If you search for New Bern stationary planning, you'll find that and a lot more supporting information. So following that, in late March, possibly early April, delivering that and the proposed zoning changes to City Council, the same kind of zoning changes that are underway along Western Boulevard and the Southern BRT corridor. So delivering those to Council, not for final approval, but for authorization to initiate that potential zoning change. There would be neighborhood meetings along the corridor. That's a standard part of a rezoning process. And then you get to that review and adoption process that I mentioned at the outset, where Planning Commission would review and recommend not just the zoning changes, but the other plan elements, the sidewalk connections, the funding, the equity fund and other funding options, and then ultimately deliver a recommendation to city council, likely in the fall, and then potentially a final public hearing and decision. That's a rough guess, but late fall or late this year. So I believe that's the last slide that I had, and I am glad to hear from y'all feedback or answer questions if there are any.
Madam Chair, this is Nathan Spencer. May I ask? Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Jason. We appreciate your update. Yes, Nathan.
I'm eager. I apologize. Jason, thank you. I don't mean to discount your presentation. I really appreciate the thoroughness of it. A couple things that I have, and I know other members are going to have lots of questions too. First and foremost, I'm glad to see that the TOD is finally getting off the ground to a point where we're looking at mapping it. I think a lot of damage has been done by the fact that this wasn't done, 5 years ago. And that's not your fault. It's just that this is coming about after we're sort of moving forward with a process. And I think a lot of displacement and trauma has happened. A couple things. One is, as you're getting out to the public to talk to them about these plans, I really stress that the planners work with the Office of Engagement and talk about the bad and the ugly on this upfront. Talk about the fact that we have a habit of going into this stuff saying everything's going to be great and beautiful and wonderful. And the truth is that this has a lot of opportunity for a lot of people, access to jobs, access to affordability. It's awesome. But there's also going to be a lot of growing pains. And that's something that needs to be addressed upfront and honestly. But this is also part of why New Bern Ave is so wonderful, is the fact that no other corridor that BRT is going along has this kind of diversity of culture and communities. Like Western Ave, as we're learning as we're planning it, is desolate in areas. You don't get that along New Bern. It's open, it's flourishing, it's growing. So there's a lot of opportunity to do this and get it right if we do it right. The last thing is my question. You mentioned historic and cultural nods and sort of acknowledging that. TPAC recently has sort of tied the arms of us in terms of art by limiting art funding and limiting how much artists can get paid. How are we proposing to acknowledge culture with such a limited budget?
Sure, that's something. So the city has an ongoing budget for public art, but if we're proposing to do more and beyond what we're envisioning, then yeah, I recognize a new funding source is helpful. That's where the equity fund would be able to fund some new public art without necessarily relying on external sources from the city.
And this is to Lupe, just so I'm clear, the equity fund is in addition to the bond referendum.
That's correct.
And where is the equity fund money coming from?
That would simply be a new funding source devoted to these kinds of needs: affordable housing, small business support, public art. To say that if we want to accomplish these goals, we need to provide some additional funding to get them done.
So then there's no money for it.
That's a council decision. They can decide.
But at this time, so you're presenting a budget. Planning is presenting a budget to City Council to support the equity fund above and beyond the affordable housing bond referendum to support this. Is there, in the event that they do not, are you pitching that this be added to the affordable housing bond referendum so it then it's already covered, because this is important, right? Equity is important. And if we're doing this affordable housing bond referendum, I would assume by virtue of the fact that it's an affordable housing bond referendum, that there will be space in there for equity. So and I know that in the affordable housing bond referendum, there is 10%, at least at the last check, put to the side for developers. Developers are saying they're going to follow the path of transportation, or the BRT, excuse me, for this affordable housing bond referendum. So if that's the case, then can we get this into the affordable housing bond referendum if there's money in there already where developers are going to possibly be causing inequity, right? By following the BRT, and they're just going to be following profit, but we're trying to get equitability. Can we ask for them to add this to the affordable housing bond referendum versus asking for additional money from wherever?
Right, that's a great question. It is part of that affordable bond money. There is money in that set aside to acquire land specifically along the BRT corridor, specifically for affordable housing. That money is going to go along all 4 corridors. I don't think there's a fully identified program for exactly where it will go. This is saying on top of that, we believe that there's some additional needs along New Bern that will merit additional funding above and beyond that.
Right. Of course, the affordable housing bond referendum has money for affordable housing. I'm saying, does the affordable housing bond referendum have money for equitable development around that affordable housing? So I'm asking if this equity fund, because the affordable housing bond referendum has other things in it that's not very equitable, i.e. developers saying they're going to follow the path of the BRT and being given 10% of the affordable housing bond referendum to do so.
Madam Chair, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong. I think right now the proposal is that this would be, again, above and beyond the bond. It might be best to determine, whether if that becomes not feasible, then to certainly look at that option. But certainly if available and if possible, I know council will be presented with options for funding the equity fund. So that hasn't happened yet. They will be provided with options for funding the equity fund. There's different measures that you can do in order to do that with new revenue. So I think obviously they would want to go through that process first, if that makes sense.
I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't make sense to me. And I don't want to fight on the subject, but I am saying if this project that we've been talking about and that Jason's been working on so hard, the equitability, developing equitability around, transportation, right? And then we have this equity fund to make sure that equitability is supplied around transportation. And we have the affordable housing bond referendum that, while it is, of course, by virtue of the name, supplying affordable housing, is not necessarily saying that it's doing it equitably, especially if developers are factored into the affordable housing bond referendum so that they can get 10% of it to follow the path of the BRT, which is what they literally said. So I guess what I'm saying is I fully understand that Jason is saying that this is money outside of the affordable housing bond referendum to afford this. I'm saying there needs to be money in it to address equity around transit that we've been working on for years, and this equitability fund. And even if it doesn't fully cover the equitability fund, there should be money from the city. If they're giving money to developers, they should give money to this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and obviously the bond has passed. So right. It, depending upon how that bond was written, it can carry certain functions. So it may depend upon what functions it can carry. I know that some of the things possibly that Jason talked about, it could carry, and some of the things that he talked about, it might not support those elements because they weren't part of the bond, if that makes sense. So, but we can follow up on that. That would be and Jason, please chime in, but I think Housing and Neighborhoods could probably, do a deeper dive for us on that. and certainly provide some clarity and clarification.
I have a bolt on question as well. To Lil Pay, I'm
Yeah, I
sorry.
guess, you know, I guess what I'm asking, and let Brian ask his in case is amplifying my message, because I think that I'm saying something a little different from what you're saying. Brian?
My question is in the spirit of what Tolulope is inquiring about, Jason. I think my question would be more specific on these specific asks of what the equity allocations would be. So, for example, I know we've already talked about the art, being a part of it. But one of my questions about the whole art piece is like, who has purview over determining what the artistical aesthetics will be, i.e. the appearance committee, right? Like, what are the specific like asks or provisions in this equity fund that will ensure the equity that is talked about, it will actually be implemented?
There it is.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When it comes to public art or really anything else, there's always community input that goes into that. So it's not me saying this is what the public art should be. Anytime we do public art, there's a lot of engagement with the community that goes into that.
Madam Chair, may I add something?
Mhm.
Um, Thank you. This is Jen Truman. I'm thinking really pragmatically, kind of along the same lines as Tolulope is thinking, but it is that one of our charges as a committee is to make recommendations to council of what we think is appropriate for them to decide. And staff can't do that to an extent, but we certainly can. And so what I'm wondering is when the options are developed for the equity fund and how it might be funded, is there potential for us as the RTA to receive a presentation and then formalize recommendations of which options that we think are correct or the right way to go so that council understands our perspective from a transit perspective?
I would say certainly. I think the concept of the equity fund is still mostly that, a concept. It's a concept for how to fund some of these, so that the affordable housing bond is just about housing. It doesn't get into small business support, public art, anything really beyond housing. And the specifics of how and what gets funded, I think there's some more community conversation about them. What this process is saying is, here are some additional needs. Here is a funding process for which I know that there is some interest that could start to make sure that we're actually funding them. There would definitely be some room for input from the authority, obviously the community in general, on what those top priorities are and what within an equity fund, how would we want to devote that money? Is it more about housing, more about community development? I think those are all still open questions.
So I'm sorry, I just want to jump in. I just like to attack it head on. So do we need to make recommendations, specific asks to the council about what we think the equity fund needs to direct funds to?
I'm sorry, Jason. I was just going to jump in and say, I think Jen hit it on the head. I would think let the recommendations be developed, and then a presentation could come back. And certainly, if you think that those are great, or you think they need to be added to or changed, certainly the RTA could develop a memo or a correspondence to council stating that, again, from a transportation or transit perspective, this is what we think that it should address.
Is there any space for us as an authority to also figure out how we can get funds for the equity fund into the affordable housing bond referendum by city council? Because and the reason why I keep bringing up the bond referendum is if we're saying that this is important and this is in essence what we've been talking about and working on for some years, if there's money up front for it, you know what I'm saying, that helps start to spur some of the equitability that we're talking about, and that then we can find more funds, like outside funds. But if there's a way that we can get at least some support from the city council, if we're talking about, and they've endorsed the equitability study around development, is there a way that in some of the margins of what's already been approved that this can get some of those funds? And does that mean that we as a transit authority need to present to city council? Do we need to have a conversation around this and not get too long in the tooth between now and our next meeting and the next city council meeting or whatever, to have a conversation with them about us talking to city council saying, hey, these are all the things we've been working on. You have this bond. We've been working with planning. So that's some cross-functional working there. And we're wondering if there's some funds that can be allocated to this that already have been approved, right? Because what could happen is for them to say there's no money.
Yeah.
Or we're struggling to get money, or it's barely funded, or it's meagerly funded. And then what we're talking about in equity is not recognized, like realized. So is there a way that we can get some Kickstarter support? And even if that means us coming with planning, saying that we understand the importance, having and presenting at a city council meeting, not behind doors, and saying, we understand the importance of the work that we're both doing and how they work together. And we think if we're really talking about making strides in this community, which you've created this bond referendum around, which seems to be focused on equity. If it's saying affordable housing, that in itself is equity, right? So if we come together with planning and present to city council and say, there's this idea, this option that we have for equitability fund, but what we're asking for not only is support for that, but for you all to give us some Kickstarter money, because we know that change is happening. We're looking at rent being astronomical across the nation, and North Carolina is at the forefront of that list of high rent. That's crazy. We're looking at housing disappearing in North Carolina. And if we combine that with the fact that our ridership is majority low income, then we are not supporting our ridership by not advocating for that. Does that make sense? Because in the long run, though we haven't been making money through COVID, in the long run, we're going to hurt making money if we move out the people using the bus. If the people using the bus cannot live here anymore, and then we're banking and hoping that people who are comfortable walking or biking to work will get on the bus. So then can we talk to city council as a collaborative of RTA and planning to say, we're asking that you at least support some Kickstarter money to this equity fund? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because they're supporting money in areas that's creating inequitability. So if they're saying they're for equitability and we're saying that, and we're all commissions of the city of Raleigh, then can we come together to do that?
I think it does, and I think this is a great time, and I can also come back, but if there's some specifics that you have in mind for Kickstarter funds, for what that could go to, this is really why I wanted to come and speak before you, to get those kinds of ideas and that kind of feedback.
Fair, but we're asking for, because you're saying that this fund has no money.
Well,
right?
The fund doesn't even yet. He said that it's just a concept. It seems to me that what we would want to do is prepare our request, like let Jason develop it more and give us more specifics of why they came up with this and what they envision it to do. Let us see that, and then we prepare and ask for city council that says the affordable housing bond has already passed, but for BC to be the best it can be, we need an equity fund, and we request that you set it up and fund it to a certain amount.
Agreed. I guess I'm just saying we're already down the line with the New Bern corridor, right? And we're pacing down the line with the other corridors. So some of the thoughts that we're having that we're saying, well, we can think about that later and see if that they can add it, they're actually emergent. You know what I'm saying? Like we're far down the line with, you know, some of the other ones, especially let's speak about New Bern specifically. We're pretty far down the line with New Bern, and we already see some of the changes happening right down New Bern Avenue. So to me, we may not have a concrete plan to present, but I think that we need to come up with something to present to them to say that we're working together and we've been using each other's expertise to make these decisions as planning and as transit, and we're wanting this to be a part of this other thing that you're planning already, because I can guarantee you that there are wiggle funds in that affordable housing bond referendum. They haven't allocated every single penny and dollar. There's some space to move around and wiggle, and some of that move around and wiggle needs to go to this. Because the last meeting that we were having, we were talking about equitability, and we were told, well, we're not at that part yet. But equitability should come at the beginning. And this is something that we've been working on when we kicked off the New Bern corridor. So my thing is, we don't want to just do this to say, hey, we're having an equitability study. Hey, we came up with this concept of an equitability fund. We want to say we have an equitability fund. Hey, we're using our equitability around transit to actually create equitability, and we're holding people like city council accountable. That's kind of what I'm pushing for here, because I know that there's money for them to, yes, it's been approved. There is money still in that they can add to this.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Nathan.
From when they were early on, when they were presenting different housing options, one of the things that they mentioned was the equity fund. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head, because the idea that was at least presented in concept then was basically a transaction fee of 7%. So if I sell a building for 10 million, the city gets, what is that, 100,000 or something like that. But the difficulty is that one of the things that we're running into with the housing bond is that $80 million is awesome, but it's also split into like six different slices for different things, and $16 million for land acquisition is nothing for New Bern Ave alone, and it's not even just for New Bern Ave. So the idea that they would have, you know, a couple $100,000 in this equity fund to start doesn't mean all that much. We really need partners. And I think we also need real commitment. And I think we need real money in there to start, because I think you're absolutely right. We're way down. This train has already left the station. By the time this equity fund, if it is transactional, gets funded, we're going to be doing the North Corridor, and that's, you know, it's only going to be valuable for there. So I very much agree with you, and I think that we should stand up and say something to council.
Even if we, thank you for that, Nathan, even if we ask them for money to pilot this, you know what I'm saying, New Bern needs it. If it's going to be piloted anywhere, it needs to be piloted on the New Bern Avenue corridor. So how can we come to, instead of saying, no, they will not, no, they won't do that. Let's also understand our power, that we're citizens, we're voting citizens. We have influence. We are not just people who are volunteering our time to be told that we can't do stuff, right? And as that, there's some measure of power and influence in this. And if we're talking all this time about equitability, we mean that. So how do we come together? I'm not trying to be confrontational or combative. I'm just saying, how can we come together to say, hey, we've decided this is important. And here's the backup. Look at these national stories about how rent in North Carolina is ridiculous. I pay less in mortgage than people are paying in rent. That's crazy. We're bringing in more businesses. People can't find housing. And this is a part of it. So if we're saying, it is us saying, let's all be accountable. We're having this equitability study. We're having this affordable housing study. You're going to implement this affordable housing when there is nobody left. The people that are left that's getting affordable housing aren't the people that we were doing this for. You know, there are people that work at Google and Apple and Nike. You know what I'm saying? So how can we get ahead of it and say, City Council, as we've been working on this, we've worked cross-functionally with other committees like planning. We see this as a need. How can we support it? Give us some funds to at least pilot up New Bern. And then we can work on getting other partners and federal support, and maybe city council can help developers buy in to give us some more of this money. Who knows? But let's create collaborations to solve this issue.
So you want, I mean, obviously, to boil it down, you're in support of funding for the equity fund, and you want to expedite that with a request to council. Okay, we got that. If we
want us to not just expedite that with a request to council from staff, I want staff to schedule time at a city council meeting for the RTA with or without planning to present to city council.
Okay.
To explain the importance from us.
And just so everybody knows the timeline, Jason, do we still have the slides that show your timeline for kind of where you are in your process? And because obviously this is an important part of that overall process as well.
That's right. That's the last slide. So looking at going to council late March, early April, that would not be the last. It's not really asking them at that point to make a final decision. That's about authorizing some zoning changes. So the bigger decision comes back to council if you look down at the bottom, likely in fall. And that's when on the public investments, on the zoning changes, on funding options, it's a late fall timeline. So that leaves some room for conversations with this board, or for this board to have some conversations with council. There's some room in that time frame.
Jason, this is Nathan Spencer. I think there's need for us to at least begin that conversation with council now, so that they can begin thinking about it and it can be presented in some form to the neighborhood meetings. Because if we put it in at the last moment, then we're really, then we're turning on our work the day before.
Agreed. And I think that this is something that we should speak as the RTA and preferably collaboratively with planning at the March or April meeting. It's worth us saying, I mean, the presentation's already done. It's worth us saying this is important. And if by then we can have some numbers, not full numbers of what the equity fund needs, but how much can we ask from this bond referendum to help kick this off? There's more than $100,000 left over, I'm sure. Yeah, there's more than a couple $100,000 left for them to give us to help us kick this off. So can we meet and start putting pressure around those points in March? So if they're going to make a public hearing decision in late fall, we're not waiting until then. What we can say, we've been saying this since March, April. We're collaborating. We need funds for this.
Yeah.
You need money for this equity fund.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. Obviously, I think planning obviously has its timeline and its process and its communication with council. Certainly, if the transit authority has particular messaging that it wants to relay, I can certainly help facilitate that. There are opportunities for report and recommendation of the Raleigh Transit Authority and any other commission at council meetings. Again, if the Transit Authority wanted to address council with a particular ask or idea, that would be the forum to do that.
Okay. I make a motion or suggest that we as an RTA get our duckies in a row so that we can present to city council and put this on their radar by no later than April.
I second that.
Yeah.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. I'll do the roll call. We getting this done, y'all.
Madam Chair?
I don't want to talk about it no more. Yes.
Madam, just one point of discussion, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the equity fund is a very important part of this conversation, but I think there are likely other topics of recommendation that have particular bearing to transit. So I just want to make sure that when we bring this back to the agenda in March to discuss and come to a consensus of our recommendations, that we have allowed maybe some feedback via email between now and then of what members believe are important other topics related to station area planning and this process.
Agreed. I do agree with that. I think that if we're going to present, let's just give them a robust presentation about some of all of the things. So it's been moved and properly seconded that we would like for us to, or do we need to make another motion? But in my mind, it's been moving properly seconded for us to discuss this through March, to prepare to present to City Council in some form or recommendations at the April City Council meeting. Okay, I will do the roll. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. Nathan Spencer.
Aye.
Sarah Prado.
Aye.
Jennifer Truman.
Aye.
Brian Burnett.
Aye.
Joshua Gill.
Aye.
LaPonda Edmondson.
Aye.
Latanya Williams.
Aye.
Thank you. Aye to Lulapeo Mokaye. So it's been passed that we are asking that we take some time in the March meeting to discuss what we want to present to City Council, but in April that we put the Equitability Fund and our work that we've been doing cross-collaboratively on the City Council's radar to ask for support for the Equity Fund from the Affordable Housing Bond Referendum or any other area where they got money they can put together and give for us to go ahead and pilot this for the New Bern Avenue corridor.
Madam Chair, I wanted to just put some specificity around this. Are we how are we going to coordinate our efforts in developing these specific asks or recommendations?
My suggestion is, Jason, if you don't mind sending out the presentation to the whole committee, to the whole council, and that we add this presentation as a line item on our next board meetings, next committee meetings for March. So looking at the presentations en route and looking at the presentations in finance and policy and in marketing to figure out what areas can we address in that to present to City Council. In our March meeting, we come together and have a line item on the agenda for us to actually put this together and talk about it, to prepare us to actually present to City Council in April.
All right, so we'll basically come back with some deal points or some notes, bullet points on what we would like to specifically present for recommendation.
Yes, from each committee, so that if there can be a line item in the August agenda that discuss this specifically, Jason, if you're available, March, excuse me, if you're available to possibly come back for the March meeting so that you can get some feedback from each committee on the presentation, and then you can give us your feedback, and then if it's you and I, or you, me and Nathan, or whoever, the whole authority as a gang, mobbing the City Council. I shouldn't say that, this is recording, I'm joking to anybody watching. But if this is an opportunity for us to come together to the City Council to say, as a united front, as a collaborative force, we have been doing this research and putting our expertise together, and we think that this is a great way for the city to move forward for equitability for all, is what I'm thinking about. Fair? Linda.
Just for the record, Madam Chair, I would like to say that my vote would have been aye had you called my name.
I'm sorry.
That last motion. Okay.
I'm used to the same. Goodness, I'm sorry. I'm on the same roster. I need to close that down and find a better one that has you on. I know I have one, but I have like 50 million of them.
But I guess the other thing, I appreciate Jason sending each of us the presentation, but my question is, when you presented it earlier today, you said this was obviously, early in the process and you would be continuing to refine it. I guess I want to make sure that as we approach the March meeting, I guess it's a question, would you, Jason, and your office be refining it to the point of dollar figures? And I guess I think what we're trying to move toward is not only what we know is important, but how much, even ballpark, some of those things we say is important, how much they cost.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what we're in the process of working on, is refining it to more specific dollar figures. And that's what I think we would be able to get involved in more detail with during your March meeting. I'm definitely available for that. I think that would be a helpful conversation. So we can look at the housing bond, for instance. That doesn't fund non-housing work, but we could definitely hear, I think it would be helpful to hear from housing and neighborhoods on the different elements that the housing bond is funding and how that can be used along New Bern Avenue. And then the other priorities that we've heard during this process that are important for funding, the small business support. And that's another one where we do have some existing programs that address that in public art. So again, this is looking at adding additional funds on top of that. And then what opportunities there are for some additional needs in this corridor. And I think that's going to be really helpful to have that conversation with y'all.
I agree. Thank you very much. You know, this is a little bit of an aside, but I am reminded of how Dix Park, you know, came together. There's so many sources of support for the various ways that Dix Park is being developed. And I think this is the same thing, especially when you talk about the history and the culture and the potential Black Main Street aspects of the corridor. That's something I think we can really drum up a lot of support for. So I'm looking forward to the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate your support, though I keep missing you in the roll call. I will get that ready. I will get that fixed for the next meeting, I promise. But to her point, I think it would be helpful, and to your point, I think it'd also be helpful to prioritize, like as you come back in March, us having a prioritization of funding. That way, when we talk to city council, it's not just this big money we need for everything, but a prioritization of what the funds will be used for, be it art, be it small business, you know, all of that. I think it'd be helpful. So when they say, well, okay, we'll allocate this fund, I want us to try to answer as many questions as they may have before we meet with them, before they have them, so that we don't have to come back to them with more answers. We can kind of get them spinning and thinking and then deciding what funds they're going to allocate to us, if that makes sense. Okay.
Madam Chair, this is Jen Truman. Can I add one thing while we have Jason's attention?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I know that the transit overlay mapping, the New Bern station area planning, the Western Boulevard study that was just approved, the Southern study that are just approved are on multiple agendas between now and our next meeting and when we're talking about in April for Planning Commission and BPAC and other commissions. And given that I know you'll be there for a lot of those presentations, I just wanted to kind of say that, and I don't think I'm stepping out of line with the rest of the board, please correct me if I'm wrong, that I think that this recommendation that we're talking about for New Bern is not unique. I think we will want to have similar recommendations and review of all of those reports in the same way that BPAC reviews them for bike and ped friendliness. I think though the land use choices and housing choices have a direct impact on the function of our transit plans. Mm-hmm. And we need to be able to have that recommendation feedback loop. So just put it on your radar as you make all those presentations.
Agreed. Sorry if you heard me. I was talking to my dog. All right. Are there any other comments, concerns, questions to add to this conversation? I think this was a really weighty conversation. I'm glad that we had it. I think that, I hope, Jason, I hope that you see that we are, our main focus here is to be, you know, partners and collaborators with planning, with you, with everyone else, to make sure that the work that we're all doing, we're doing smarter, not harder, that we don't have to turn around 10 years, 5 years from now and wish we'd done things differently, you know, or readjust, that we can kind of do it now. And I appreciate you coming to our meetings to have these conversations with us, to work with us so that we can kind of get some understanding about what you're doing. It helps us feed our ideas. And I thank you for being open to our suggestions.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, moving on. So we have if there are nothing else from staff information items. All right, we're going to move on to our committee reports.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. For Route Committee, there's a couple items that we're going to bring to you to discuss. And I apologize. I know it's almost 6, but there are some.
I'm sorry, Nathan. I don't mean to cut you off. I apologize. David, since we're about at 6, and I know we're going to start losing people, myself included, because I do have to jump off. I've stayed longer and I've pushed back another meeting, but I can stay a little bit longer. What information do we need to go over today in this meeting for those that may need to jump off? What information can be held over to the next meeting? And if everybody can stay and I'm the only one that may have an issue, then I'm going to gracefully bow out in about 15 or so and let Nathan take over.
I would just say if there's any action items, I did not remember off the top of my head if there are action items within the committee reports, but that's what I would recommend to bring forward, and maybe, and obviously the board can see the other items that will remain pending in those committees.
So is anybody, before we jump to the committee reports, is anybody on a time crunch right now where we're at 5:48? If we can, nobody? Everybody's good?
I gotta leave by 6.
You have to leave by
I also need
6?
to leave by 6.
Okay, so that's 3 of us. Does that put us out of quorum?
I have to leave at 6 as well.
4 of us. All right. So are there any high-level items maybe from the committee reports that we can report out? And anything else that's not so high level or it could be passed over, waited to the next board meeting, that can be sussed out. So if the chairs, if you all don't mind, because we're gonna start losing people, and I know we're not voting on anything, we're gonna lose quorum. So I mean, whether that matters or not, but if we can just maybe hit the high level things for those of us that are here until 6, and then we can kind of address the other things that are not so high level next month, if possible, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Chair, this is Andrea Epstein with Transit. We don't need anything from marketing addressed this month.
Okay, and Karen's not here, so that's perfect.
Correct. Thank
I know
you.
LaPonda was going to address that. LaPonda, is there a couple things that you want to touch on?
I can just touch on a few things, or it just depends on time, but we don't have anything urgent.
Okay, so we'll hold marketing to the end. So if there's nothing that we can gotta jump on, then we'll move that to next month. But if we can jump into route and then policy and finance to give us some high level info from the meetings.
I just have 2 time sensitive pieces for route.
Right on.
The first is we discussed the fact that there's the shelter outside of the DGX, I'm sorry, the Dollar General Store, whatever, downtown on Blunt Street. The city is recommending to transportation to remove that shelter due to activity outside of there. The route committee was none too happy with some of that. It's sort of like trying to solve a problem by blaming the wrong thing. DGX is not managing the people outside very well, and there seems to be a lot of loitering, and therefore what's ending up happening is that there's people hanging out causing trouble by the bus stop. The city's solution is to remove the bus stop, which is going to inconvenience people. It's a high ridership bus stop. It is a block away from Go Raleigh Station, but there's last time I checked, there was between 15 and 11 boardings per day. So
we would be moving. I'm sorry, Nathan, just for clarification, we'll be moving the shelter, but not the stop.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But it is a shelter. And so that is the first thing. And so I just want to address it to the board so that we're aware that this is an issue, and as we have these conversations, maybe to bring them to our council members. The only other thing is that there is a Midtown microtransit RFP going out soon. It's for a shuttle to go between North Hills, Midtown area, and downtown. It would be on demand. And so look out for more details on that. The good side of part of this is that we might be able to gain something out of looking at the fact that maybe we don't need a 40-foot bus for every single thing that we do, and maybe we can look at the technology for that. So those are my 2 items.
Thank you, Nathan. Are there any questions on the shuttle update or the Midtown update? I mean, the shelter update or the Midtown update?
I have feedback, Brian Burnett here. I just have feedback on the Midtown shuttle. I think that would be highly valuable just because it would reduce some of the congestion of traffic downtown. And I think would also be a good way for persons that live in downtown Raleigh to actually have a little bit more variety of employment, because a lot of times you may not necessarily want to work right downtown, and there are a lot of jobs, and clearly there's a lot of opportunity coming to the North Hills area. So I definitely like that. So looking forward to that RFP, that Midtown shuttle.
Awesome. And is there? I do have a question on the shelter. Is there nothing that? Oh, stop! Let me get up here. Is there nothing that that the police or anybody can do in regards to the problems that we're having at that shelter? Or, you know what I'm saying, without us having to move, excuse me, who wants to be in this meeting? Without us having to move the shelter, is there anything that we can do with the problems that we're having there?
I'm glad you asked. David, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I would say that in coordination with several agencies downtown, as well as with RPD in transportation, traffic services, we've tried a lot of different options over the last year, and they have not produced the results that that individuals would have hoped they would, put it that way. So again, we, as much as you all, I mean, aren't excited about this. This isn't the first time we've ever had to do this. But the good news is that sometimes conditions change, and in other instances, we have been able to reinstate, our facility in its previous location. So we certainly hope that that's the case here. But we do want to, at least provide the opportunity for RPD and others to determine if this might be a mitigating factor.
I'm going to note just to the whole board that we're discussing neighborhood stores as a zoning idea. So for me personally, as we talk about transportation and the connection to land use, this is a very dangerous sliding slope if we're looking at difficulty with people loitering around something, so therefore we remove the shelter. I think that we need to explore other ways, including maybe finding a company that makes billions of dollars, but that's just me. So I'm done.
I agree.
Truman, may I add one more comment?
Yes, please.
I think, Nathan, that was very eloquent. I definitely agree. I'm going to be a little shorter, and I'm going to say I don't think we should take shelter placement or transit planning advice from RPD.
Thank you for your input. Anybody else? Because I agree that I believe that we need to be more. I don't want us to get to the place where, I mean, I get that there's a lot of issues happening at that shelter, and I'm curious about how many reports we're having from it before we decide to move it. But as we're trying to find new places to place shelters, I'm a little leery about removing that shelter, because does it mean that removing that shelter is going to remove the problem? If people are already congregating there because there's a stop there, and I don't think we need to remove the stop. It's a high value stop, and not everybody wants to sit at Moore Square to wait for their bus because it can get crowded, and there's all sorts of elements there.
Brian Burnett here. I mean, probably need to speak even more specifically. So I was actually talking to a colleague about this about 4 hours ago, and it seems like what has spurred this was there was an assault there, and the reason for the stop being removed is so that there is more visibility in the area. And so I think that bringing some ideas or some fresh ideas around how to perhaps mitigate or keep I would say maintain safety in that area without removing the stop would be great. But at the end of the day, I mean, just I'm grown up in certain areas. Certain areas are going to attract a certain level of activity, and you certainly don't want people not feeling safe when they're out there, waiting for the bus. Whether someone is directly being assaulted or impacted or indirectly impacted by, unsafe activity. So I think we just need to come back with some ideas around a solution. Yeah, it is kind of unsavory to remove a bus shelter because then people have to wait for transportation within the elements. But at the end of the day, if we know there's a problem there and people are congregating there, then maybe that's a place that you provide more attention to activity that you want, that you don't want, and then vice versa. So if that's not the solution, then we definitely need to have some type of presence. Maybe it's not police presence, but some type of ambassador presence down there to mitigate that if we're not going to remove the bus shelter. But something needs to be done that's like radical, because you don't want people being assaulted in an area that's highly visible and using the shelter literally as a shelter to hurt people. So that's my 2 cents.
This is Sarah Prado. I just have a quick question. Sorry, Tolupe. So my solution would obviously be like more lighting. I am sure that, is there any way of adding lighting within the shelter? So that it's visible inside as well as outside, rather than removing the shelter per se? It seems like a pretty easy fix, like just adding some lights inside it.
Yeah, this is David with the City of Raleigh. We did add additional lighting probably a year and a half ago, and it didn't resolve any problems.
Thank you.
When did we put up that shelter at that stop?
I don't know the exact date. It's been there at least 3 to 4 years, I would guess.
And I'm asking because I know that somebody was shot at that corner. A homeless person, before the shelter was even put there, was trying to engage somebody. So there's been issues there. The shelter is not, to me, it's not a major factor in my mind, because somebody was shot there recently. There have been issues right there. And I think that us maybe putting AV in the shelter, maybe it's a pilot, and that shelter is the pilot, because we have shelters, places where that's dangerous to people, where people are possibly getting assaulted, maybe not as high a frequency, and it doesn't get reported back to us, right? That somebody was assaulted at a bus stop at a dark corner, and maybe all sorts of assaults. So is it possible that we can do a little AV in our shelters? I kind of feel like
that's been done
at that shelter.
That is correct.
With signage saying that there's video and audio watching people in the shelter?
I'm not sure about the signage, but we can check on that.
Yeah, I think that if there was no sign, I think that people, when they know they're being watched, they tend to behave a bit differently. And in some measure, there may be nothing that we can do. We can take the shelter away. It's not going to stop there being problems at that stop, because the problems were there before the shelter was put there.
I agree with that, because it sounds like more RPD is passing the buck, and a shelter is not going to change the situation. It has to do with either that corner, that intersection. So either police need to do better how to solve the problem. Moving the shelter is not it, because the shelter is supposed to protect the riders. So if if it's raining or whatever or sunny, the whole purpose around the city of Raleigh, we don't have enough shelters. So removing a shelter is not solving the issue. So RPD need to find a way to figure out how to increase presence in that area, or maybe put cameras out there for themselves. But removing the shelter is not going to solve the issue, because if you remove the shelter and the same thing is happening, that means it's an RPD problem, not a transit problem.
I agree.
So,
clarification,
remove the shelter, you might as well say I'm removing the bus stop. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say for clarification, the shelter has been removed since committee meeting. Again, we'll certainly monitor its condition at that stop, but the stop remains as stated earlier. If the opportunity, arises for us to return that, we certainly want to.
If the committee makes a makes a votes on something in meeting, isn't it supposed to then come to the full authority before it's implemented?
It wasn't an action item, Madam Chair.
I'm
We
sorry?
had no vote on it.
You're too far away, Nathan.
I'm sorry?
I couldn't hear you.
Couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry. We had no vote on it. It was not an action item. It was an information item.
So y'all were going to do this regardless. This is something that staff had decided to do regardless.
I wouldn't say the staff, but certainly, collectively as a city, we want to make sure that we're trying to be responsive and also think of safety. Again, if we continue to monitor this area and we can return that shelter, then we certainly would like to do that, most definitely. Our mission as transit is to put out passenger amenities, obviously to provide high quality transit. This is contrary to our normal protocols by all means as well. But also we do understand that we have to work, cooperatively, not only internally, but externally with all the businesses and citizens who are in that area.
Okay. This is just you all informing us that you were going to do this thing. Then in my mind, yeah, it's already been moved since the committee. So in my mind, if you all were already going to do it, then I don't understand why it even went to committee. It could have just been something that you all said to us as an information item and then didn't need to be a committee item. This is something y'all are doing. We ain't got to vote. You just informing us. So we don't want to feel like, and I'm speaking for myself and I hope I'm speaking for others, we're all busy. We don't want to feel like we making motions and moves and votes and things that we don't even really need to talk about. It's already a thing.
Yeah, we did present it as information. You are correct.
Don't try to be slick with me, David. Don't think I didn't catch that. Don't think I didn't catch that. All right, so then we'll just go ahead and move to the next thing. Are we done with the route committee? I actually have to drop it. We're done with route. All right, so we need to then transition it to policy and finance. And I know, Joshua, you were on a time crunch also.
Yeah, I also did not attend the meeting. I was out of town. So if there are any action items, I would have to hear from staff.
If there are no action items and there are no action items from marketing, then unless LaPonza has something that that's pressing that she wants to report out from marketing.
Nothing pressing to report out on. Thank you.
Okay.
Real quick, this is David, City of Raleigh. For finance and policy, the bus shelter policy is an action item. If you want to do that today, it's definitely not something that has to be done. We can bring it back next month. This is the update to the bus shelter policy, adding a new tier of amenity to our existing policy.
We can bring it back next month.
I agree with Joshua, excuse me, that we address this next month. Since we're kind of long in the tooth right now. Is there anything else that we need to discuss today that's pressing or time sensitive?
We're good on route.
All right. So are there any then additional items that from the authority, anything that the authority wants to bring up, present, speak on?
Just before we head out, I attended the TPAC meeting on Wednesday. The authority should be aware that Campo is beginning a conversation about financing and funding for the Wake Transit Plan. And currently the way it's looking is that they're positioning commuter rail versus expanding bus options in a lot of different ways. We'll get more over the next month or so, but and I'll make a more full report in an email with some slides, but there may be some changes down the line if they win out in a rail versus buses attitude of things.
Thank you for that update, helping us keep our eye on other divisions. Is there anything else from anyone else? Is there anything else from staff? All right, I have nothing else. I just want to say thank you all for being engaged in today's meeting. I'm sorry we have to cut it a bit close. Anything that we need to discuss, let's please hold it over to the committee meetings or bring it to the next Transit Authority meetings if it's not pressing today. And if all hearts and minds are clear, I want to thank everybody for joining this meeting, for being engaged. Thank you for your input. Thank you for sticking with us, though we kind of got a little long. I want to call this meeting to adjournment at 6:07 p.m. on February 10th, 2022. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for your energy, authority. Thank you for your time and energy, staff, and anybody and all the other, well, they're gone now. I'm gonna say everybody else that presented today. But I want to thank everybody. I thank you for all of our engagement. We go back and forth, but we need this passion. Our difference of opinion is important to make sure that we're making transit equitable and safe and pleasurable for everybody in the city. So I thank you all, and I hope you all have a great one. Please stay safe and healthy until we meet again.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Have a great one.
Thank you. Good night.